Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Do take a look at the Russian fleets of September, October 1863 in the C-SPAN video library under Tarpley. And, it is certainly one of the most popular programs on C-SPAN having to do with the sesquicentennial of the Civil War, and with a certain amount of help from friends, it might well get rebroadcast, because I see that they're rebroadcasting some other anniversary events. The one on the Chickamauga-Chattanooga battle, the 2-hour one, has now been rebroadcast, despite a much lower level of interest than my Russian fleet's lecture. So again, we're waiting for the liberation of Aleppo. In terms of Syria, right, everything now looks forward to the Geneva conference, which is about a month away. And of course, the rebels won't go. Assad will go, but he's not going to give up power. And the U.S. policy is more and more bankrupt. The voices attempting to get a war any way they can, more and more isolated, more and more hysterical. But this is typically the moment when the false flag event is pulled out, and that killing of the Hariri functionary in Beirut shows that these capabilities remain in place. And perhaps on an even larger scale, the Pyatigorsk, southern Russia, Stavropol region bomb also shows that the time of the Sochi Olympic Games must be a time of great vigilance and great maturity, so that people are not stampeded by whatever the diehard imperialist hardliners may decide to pull out. Now, it was the night before Christmas, and all through the House, there was widespread disgust about the interview with Edward Snowden, which became the headline story of the Washington Post. Tuesday, December 24th, headline story, big picture, the entire Washington Post above the fold. Edward Snowden, I already won. And there he is, unshaven, right? Is he imitating the old Arafat look? I don't know. I have already won, says the braggart Snowden. Well, I quickly laid down a Twitter challenge to this faker. Dear Ed Snowden, if you are not a limited hangout, then please prove it by telling us something we do not know about a big covert operation of the CIA, of MI6, of the Israelis. Tell us about 9/11. Tell us about the Arab Spring. Tell us about the killing of Gaddafi. Tell us about the shipping of the death squads into Syria and their arming. Tell us about subversive operations involving Morsi of Egypt. Tell us something geopolitical, something big, something that matters. We're not going to hold our breaths on that one, because he's had plenty of time. Even the Washington Post in the Wonk blog then responded, no, Snowden, you haven't won anything. There have been no significant substantive policy changes as a result of your revelations. The Washington Post claims his leaks have fundamentally altered the U.S. government's relation with its citizens and the rest of the world. Yeah, that's like saying he changed the national or indeed international conversation, but we know that it's always changing. It goes from Honey Boo Boo to Miley Cyrus to Madonna to Lady Gaga, and then on to the NSA, but then soon back to Honey Boo Boo or whatever it is, or the Duck Dynasty, or various other possible themes. In the course of this interview, what I found notable is that he seems to be sending some messages to those who may still be his masters. He wants to steer the conversation to surveillance democracy and his documents. Notice he says, remember, I didn't want to change society. That's what he says. He has no program of any changes. I didn't want to change society. Is this a revolutionary? You tell me. I wanted to give society a chance to determine if it should change itself. And you think that this is primarily or exclusively a matter of NSA surveillance? All I wanted was for the public to be able to have a say in how they are governed. And again, this is a matter of phone tapping or reading the Internet. I don't know. I am skeptical. And again, I'm more and more skeptical because we're not getting anything. My challenge to Snowden would also be, give us something that will destroy the career of one big, odious U.S. politician. Do you have anything that will put paid to Hillary Clinton's presidential ambitions? Can you expose one of the top libertarians or reactionary Republicans? Can you essentially go through any of this, right? Can you give us something we don't know about somebody in Britain? Can you bring down the conservative government in Britain with GCHQ and all that? Or how about Netanyahu? He certainly must figure in some of these. So Snowden, please, tell us something we don't know, because otherwise a lot of us figure that you are just another tentacle, just another limited hangout in this tiresome parade that goes back to Ellsberg and Assange and quite a few others. Remember the criteria. The figure, the celebrated figure, in this case the whistleblower, has a Damascus Road conversion. Remember in Ars Technica, this magazine, in January 2009, Snowden says those people should be shot in the testicles. That is to say, he's talking about Assange and other leakers, other people on Cryptome or whatever it is, right? He's against them. He became an immediate media darling. He's got the London Guardian and the Washington Post with Barton Gellman in his corner. This doesn't happen for people that are not favored by the establishment. Please, I mean, how naive can we be? Other whistleblowers with more explosive and more specific revelations are ignored by these same heroes of investigative journalism. We get nothing new, and I've gone through it. We get nothing big, nothing about 9/11, nothing that would blow the lid off the psychological control mechanisms. And, of course, this is being used to prepare new covert operations. As I've tried to point out, one of the things that Snowden has done is to, as Van Williams confessed on television, he said the termites really went to work on Obama's popularity back in June when the Snowden revelations came out. In other words, the relation of dupes and dupees, dupers and dupes between Obama and his left liberal base, that went into crisis when Snowden was trotted out with his stories. And that, of course, is important because the oligarchical establishment controls president in the first term by their need to get money for a second term. And when they're in the second term, as we've seen from Nixon to Reagan to Clinton, they control the president by keeping him on the defensive under scandal attack. That is, the second term jinx is simply a program of the oligarchy to prevent the president from doing whatever he might want to do. In the case of Obama, that might be something horrendous, like global warming regulations, whatever. The whole thing is used to create new covert ops and creates new careers. And Greenwald wants to be the guy whose career is made. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So Snowden says he's already won. Well, let's compare him to actual revolutionaries of the past, right? You can compare it to the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the American Revolution, right? The real ones, right? The ones that actually created important institutional changes, right? The American Civil War obviously counts as a second American revolution, without which the modern world would be simply unthinkable. In case of the 20th century, right, we had this question of what groups in society could be the historical protagonist of revolution, and the Marxists came forward and said, well, it's the industrial working class, it's the proletariat. In the case of Snowden and company, it's the hackers, it's essentially marginal people, autistic sociopaths sitting in front of screens, people like Assange. And by some strange coincidence, we're now getting the 30th year, the 30th 30 anniversary, and it's continuing, of the Chaos Communications Conference in Hamburg, Germany, the most British of all German cities, of course. And there we have Assange will be holding forth, and Glenn Greenwald. They're going to be co-headlining that conference, I guess, in both cases by webcam. So this is a group that's been around, right? These are the hackers, right? These are the people who act out, right? The Pirate Party, other spin-offs have been taken off of this. But again, what is revolutionary here? Let's go back to Lenin, right? Lenin, certainly a revolutionary, whatever you think of his methods, and I would criticize them a great deal. I think, for example, Rosa Luxemburg's critique of Lenin has a lot of merit, although it is also not perfect. But Lenin had sloganized, right, everything. All power to the Soviets, peace, bread, land, a program that was widely understandable in Russia at the time. Now, if you wanted to boil down Assange and Snowden and Greenwald to a program, they would say, all power to the whistleblowers, transparency, privacy, and net neutrality. Yeah, all power to the whistleblowers, transparency, privacy, and net neutrality. Now, you can see what the problem is with that. We've got recent articles in the Washington Post, even, about the digital divide. Even in the United States, there are lots of places that are still stuck with the obsolete dial-up internet. And we've still got a majority of people in the world who have never made a phone call, quite apart from having computers. In other words, this is a class distinction. There's a bright line class divide between internet access and not. Like this, it's come up in Italy, among other things, because of the internet fetishism of the five-star movement of Beppe Grillo, that much of southern Italy and the poorer parts of the entire country are completely left out. But transparency, privacy, and net neutrality? Suppose you're a victim of this depression. Your food stamps have been cut and your unemployment has been cut. You're starving. You're going to be evicted from your home under a foreclosure. Your kids can't continue their education because you can't pay the student loans and you can't pay the increased tuition. Your wife is sick and you can't get medical care. And the revolutionary Snowden is going to come and say transparency, privacy, and net neutrality. You see here that Snowden is arguing that the essence of the human personality, in other words, the epiphany of who you are, is manifested in privacy. And I will say that is simply wrong. That is monstrously wrong. It is not in privacy that you show who you are. It is in revolutionary praxis. Who is strong? Who is good? This is not found in contemplating your own privacy. This involves going in public, going into the marketplace of ideas, going into the blood and sand of the arena, and if necessary, going onto the political battlefield, whatever that may look like. That is where the true worth or lack of it of an individual is manifested. So what you see here is it's a petty bourgeois, class-based program, if you want to call it that, and it takes you away. It takes you in the opposite direction from what is needed, because what is needed is revolutionary mass action. To take a series of demands, the Wall Street sales tax, the nationalization of the Fed, the 30 million jobs, we'll have something to say about a protective tariff. We want to add a protective tariff to that also to try to show organized labor that it is not enough to say no to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but it's going to be necessary to say 15% protective tariff so we don't have to compete with sweatshop labor across the world, right? It's a way to raise the minimum wage across the world if you do this right. But no, Snowden, and I guess by extension Assange, I suppose they're in friendly competition, the two of them, as the two of the leading narcissists of the age, that they would come forward and say, no, privacy is the essence. Well, that, by definition, atomizes everybody, locks you into your own alienated private sphere. The whole point of revolutionary action is to get you out of your alienated private sphere and into that area of revolutionary praxis, or practice, whichever you like. And therefore, I say this is not going to do it. And I would say even more, as the mass upsurge of 2015 approaches, by the time we're into 2014, we're going to see the harbingers of that mass upsurge all over the place. This year already, 2013, we've seen Brazil, we've seen Turkey, we've seen Egypt, we've seen mass strikes all across Southern Europe, mass strikes against austerity. So these are the first rumblings. As we go into 2014, those rumblings, especially in the springtime, and remember the springtime in the Mediterranean comes in January, February, as we saw in 1848 and as we saw then in 2011. It's going to be time for those harbingers of the big upsurge to come. At this point, the ruling class is going to start playing Cacciatorians, the comedian. They're going to say, bring in the clowns, and we'll explain what that means in just a minute. So our perspective here on World Crisis Radio is that 2015 is going to repeat the 7-year into the Depression phenomenon we associate with 1936. 1936, big mass strike upsurges in Spain, in France, the Popular Front, and the United States. The re-election of the New Deal on the most radical of all of Roosevelt's election platforms, followed then by the creation of the United Auto Workers, the United Steel Workers of America, or at least their emergence as mass trade union organizations. 7 years into the Depression, 1929 to 1936, 7 years into this Depression, 2008 to 2015. And already, in my view, 2014 is going to be dominated by this. We've seen this from think tanks in London. We've seen Mélenchon of the French Parti de la Gauche, the left party, saying France is in 1788. In other words, on the brink of revolution. I would take that seriously. Sometimes people say more than they know. Maybe that's in this category. You can go and see the full development of this thesis in my June speech to the Left Forum in New York. Now, of course, the ruling class knows this too. At least parts of the ruling class do, not all of it. The ruling class that says, let's let the emergency unemployment benefits run out for 1.3 million plus 1.9 million families, they are not so much in touch with this area, right? Ruling class is a big thing. It's not homogeneous, but some of them do know. And their response, as I say, is put on Cacciatorian's suite from the comedians and send in the clowns. Send in the clowns. Send in Russell Brand, the great revolutionary leader. We probably couldn't say on the air what his program might be, right? If Lenin was all power to the Soviets, peace bred land, and Snowden is all power to the whistleblowers, transparency, privacy, and net neutrality, then we have to see what Russell Brand's would be. It's probably some substances, among other things, but also some practices that are probably now illegal or at least frowned on. Russell Brand, and then the comedians, the actual official comedians, the Pepe Grillos, the Dieudonnés, the Jesse Venturas, the Howard Sterns, and on and on. These characters will be dished up to some extent, or some of them will be, as leaders because they have mass recognition, of course. And we can add Snowden and Assange as part of that phalanx. Send in the clowns. Send in the misleaders. Send in the pathetic excuses for mass leaders, mass organizers, mass program bearers. So there's where we are. In terms of Southern Europe, I just want to mention we have this interesting Italian economist, Giulio Sapelli, Sapelli. He is a Keynesian, I guess, by doctrine, but I think he's actually somewhat better than the usual Keynesian run of, certainly better than Krugman, better than the U.S. brands of these things. And what Sapelli talks about, he says that a professor by the name of Giuseppe Guarino has proposed a Latin bloc inside the European Union, starting with France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and that the purpose of this bloc would be to contest, to resist the ultra-austerity coming from the Bundesbank, coming from Merkel. That is long overdue. Sapelli points out a couple of interesting facts. He says the hysteria of Merkel about the European Union going the way of East Germany is hypocritical because her father was a Lutheran minister in East Germany under the communist regime who collaborated. Unlike most Lutheran ministers who were focus points of resistance, her father was a collabo. He was a collaborator with the communist regime, and that's how Merkel got to become a scientist and get these university courses back in the old DDR. And Sapelli also quotes a document we're going to be looking at in the coming weeks, the open letter by Helmut Schmidt to Hans Tietmeyer of the Bundesbank, 8th of November, 1996, in which Helmut Schmidt, experienced as Chancellor of Germany from the 70s to the 80s, warns the Bundesbank against their austerity policies, and he also points out that if you only have the German mark, that will be upvalued into the ionosphere, and German exports will be strangled. And this is the thing that all of the petty bourgeois critics of the euro have somehow not figured out, that if you're the Greek currency by yourself, you'll be destroyed. You'll be driven down to the center of the earth. But if you're the German currency, with all probability, you're going to be bid up so high that no German export could ever sell again in the world. So he says that this is coming from Romano Prodi, former Italian prime minister, candidate for president of Italy back earlier this year, and this guy, Giuseppe Guarino, and Sapelli seems to be part of it. So we're going to try to look into that. Now, let's try to end on a couple of notes here. First of all, I just mentioned the protective tariff, right? We've got this fight going on now about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I can hear the giant sucking sound once again. Remember, Perot, crazy as he was on debt, was certainly right when he said that free trade was a sellout and that it should not go through. And Perot's debate with Al Gore back in, 1993, 1994, that is the basis for the Democrats losing the Congress to Newt Gingrich in 1994. The giant sucking sound. It was the economic impact of NAFTA that destroyed the Democratic majority that had lasted since, 1948. So in this case, we've got the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And once again, it's the U.S., Canada, Mexico, plus 9 powers across the Pacific. And some of them are notable. Many of them, I'm afraid, are notable for their sweatshop labor. It is impossible. It is absolutely uneconomical to demand that American workers compete with sweated labor from across the world. So, of course, you have to say no to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But, as we know, in politics as in war, there is no greater misery than to stand exclusively on the defensive. If you have no ability to counterattack, no ability to undertake your own offensive, you are doomed to lose. And that is why when austerity is the question, you counterattack with the Wall Street sales tax. And when we have this question of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the counter to that is the need for a protective tariff rooted deeply in American history. Remember, Henry Clay's American system, a national bank, infrastructure all across the country, and a protective tariff. And some would also add the promotion of science and technology at government expense. Some of those, if we mix in Alexander Hamilton with the Henry Clay American system, we get something like that. But the protective tariff was the mark of economic nationalism all through the 19th century. It remains so today. Take a look at my book, the Surviving the Cataclysm. You'll see in there I recommend it's really a revenue tariff, but in today's world, a protective tariff, 10 to 15% on all imports. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So there you have it. It is time to mobilize against the Trans-Pacific Partnership and indeed against any other free trade deal. That includes the other ones that Obama has imposed. It's time to break out of these things. I'm afraid NAFTA is also counterproductive in its current form. There should certainly not be any such free trade deal with the European Union. You'd be competing with sweated labor in Eastern Europe. These are ways to drive down the living standard here. If you're concerned about the middle class, you can't be for free trade. But again, as a matter of politics and as a matter of policy alternatives, you got to have an alternative to it, and that is what is, again, in historical terms, it would be simply a revenue tariff of 10 to 15%. In today's terms, it would be considered a protective tariff. So call it a protective tariff. And again, if the 10 to 15% is not enough, then you can increase it. But if you can't get 10 to 15%, you're going to have a hard time getting anything more. This is a chance to educate trade union forces about the American system. You can go back to speeches by William McKinley, by Andrew Stewart, by Henry Clay, by Lincoln, right, by Justin Morrill. The Morrill tariff, as soon as the South was out of the Union, the protective tariff, the Morrill tariff was brought in, and that is what made the world's greatest industrial power and ushered in the modern world. Similarly, in Germany at the same time, the German school of Friedrich List imposed a protective tariff, which led to rapid industrialization. Germany soon passed the British, and the Austrian school is an attempt to counterattack that wonderful progress. Now, positive element here at the end. Fusion energy. Here we go. Now, remember, gold is where you find it. So hang on, brace yourself. George F. Will of the Washington Post and now of Fox News, right? Not even of ABC, but of Fox. George F. Will, known as Will the Shill. But in this case, hats off to Will the Shill. A dazzling bright future dawns in New Jersey. And he does not mean Christie, the Garden State Girling, but he means the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory and the new NSTX fusion reactor. It is a tokamak. This is not fission power. This is not uranium. It's not plutonium. It's not even thorium. It is water. It's tritium and deuterium. It runs on thermonuclear fusion power. It's not the principle of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's the principle of the hydrogen bomb. But of course, in this case, it is clean. It does not produce radioactive waste. The fuel is abundant, and the energy payoff is absolutely huge. So the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory is in the process of recovering. I've been telling you a little bit about this, right? This is now the NSTX, which is now expected to begin giving its results. And of course, the reason that this has taken so long is because the old fusion tokamak fusion test reactor. This was also at the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory. That was shut down through cuts in the late 1990s. The tokamak fusion test reactor had created this temperature record of about 260 million degrees, much higher than anything ever observed in nature, much higher than anything in the center of a star or the center of a galaxy or anything else that we've ever been able to measure. That was shut down in the late 90s. Then came the Stellarator, which was a modified tokamak design. That was shut down about 2007, 2008. Actually, the decision to shut it down was made under Bush the Younger, which Will the Shield tries to hide. But now we are on the brink of the biggest progress in human history. And again, I don't mind reflecting that this has been brought to the attention of the public by somebody like Will. This will be the achievement which will be more transformative of human life than any prior scientific achievement, because it essentially wipes out penury, it wipes out scarcity of energy, abundant energy, universally available based on seawater or any other kind of water you need to find, and this will then power humanity for the entire relevant historical future. So you don't need to fight about oil, you don't need to worry about carbon. It escapes all of the ideological polemics. And the idea is you've got to, if people may know this, I first became aware of the fusion issue in the early 1950s. As a very young child, I had a book about cosmology by George Gamow, Gamow, and old George Gamow was telling you about the lithium-hydrogen engine, and he said, yeah, well, this could give really unlimited energy, lithium and hydrogen. The problem is, how do you contain it? What kind of walls can you use? The stars use gravity to contain it, and so what do you do? Well, the idea is you use magnetic fields to contain it. So the United States is now spending a minuscule $2.5 billion over 10 years for this. The Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory has gone in recent decades from 1,400 employees to 450. They have not prospered under Obama. Now, Will wants to say, well, let's rip off Social Security, let's rip off Medicaid and so forth, and we'll use that to build these tokamaks. It's like like Blumenauer, who says, let's rip off people with the gas tax and we'll build some infrastructure. I'm sorry. Wall Street will pay, and the Federal Reserve will provide the financing. Now, of course, the other aspect of this is it takes a lot of computing power. I'm aware now of the Titan computer. The Titan computer sits in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, right, formed under the Manhattan Project. The Titan computer of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, does 17 quadrillion calculations per second. Don't let Wall Street get their hands on the Titan computer, or we'll be dealing with 17 quadrillion trades per second. But, of course, with the Wall Street sales tax, after 100 trades, it's all over because you've wiped out your capital. So the notion is now that after the dismantling of the tokamak fusion test reactor, which had reached those record temperatures, after the dismantling of the Stellarator, which was promising but which was then mothballed, we've now got the NSTX, which we talked about previously on the program. And this is the prelude now to the ITER. And the ITER is this operation in the south of France. It is a joint program of the United States, the European Union, Russia, China, India, Japan, Korea, the main economic and scientific powers of the world. It is at a place called Cardache, Cardarche, Cardache. And that's going to be the site, that's going to be the cynosure of humanity in the coming decade as they attempt to go beyond break-even to a sustained production of energy, and that will then be the immediate prelude to an initial pilot commercial reactor. This is the great promise now on the horizon of mankind. Notice that the forces active in the U.S. Congress to cut this stuff down are Malthusian forces in alliance with big oil, okay, and other backward forms of energy, right? And therefore, this is the promise. So we've got to do something about this. Remember, in the space area, one of our science drivers, we now have no manned spaceflight technology. The Cassini probe, which sent back such beautiful pictures of Saturn, is in danger. And in terms of our biomedical research, that has been disrupted massively by the sequester this year. The only area where we have any hope of making any breakthrough is the Princeton plasma physics and ITER fronts. But we've got to gear up to refund the space program and the biomedical research through the NIH. These are now immediate priorities for 2014. So Happy New Year to all, and keep fighting always. See you next year on World Crisis Radio.